I would like to thank Sister Nataki Cambone and Dr. Maria Cambone for me into the State of Emergency Global Black Community Town Hall meeting um, that's dealing with Black unity and healing. And I want to make my contribution. I'm Professor James Small, in case you missed the name, and I'm looking at culture and spirituality. But I'd like to make my contribution by reading a definition of culture by one of my former professors from Nigeria, Professor Akinjobin, an extraordinary teacher, and he wrote this wonderful book. It's called Milestones and Social Systems in Yoruba History and Culture. And his name is I.A. Akinjobin. Very important book. But what I want to read is Professor Akinjobin's definition of culture, because his definition of culture just hits the spot. Dr. Akinjobin says, in actual fact, culture consists of all the items in the life of a group of human beings which make them to feel belonging to one another. Listen to that again. Which makes them to feel belonging to one another, distinct from any other group around them. It comprises their language, their religion, their dress, their social system, their economic system, their food, their leisure, their medical and technological knowledge, and so on and so forth. He goes further and he says, culture is not static, it is dynamic. Certain items that are no longer useful at a particular period in a particular culture can be discarded and are usually discarded in favor of new items that would suit the circumstances of the time. And I think that's a good definition. What I would add to that, given what he said, is what Dr. Marimba Ani says. And what Dr. Ani says is that it is culture that protect the people from genocide. Dr. Asa Hilliard, our great ancestors, taught us that it is culture that is the tool that carry on intergenerational transmission of the group's wisdom. And so when we are talking about healing and spirituality and culture, you know, spirituality is at the core of the culture. And we won't truly understand spirituality in its fullest sense unless we really understand the nature of ancestry. You know, when my mother gave birth to me, she gave birth to herself and my father. When my grandparents, the four of them, gave birth to my mother and father, they gave birth to themselves. And when my great parents, the eight of them, gave birth to my four grandparents, they too were giving birth to themselves. So in the African spiritual culture, I am the continuum of the first member of my family ever to be manifest from the divine as human. In that regards, my family branched off of the first African woman who was the first manifestation of cosmology and ecology as a human being. Thus, I am the great, 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 umpteen times grandson of God itself. And so that's clear. If you want to understand African culture, it is the culture of godness. Here's what I mean by that. African culture is a phenomena that our ancestors kept replicating and trying to manifest the divine essence in themselves. They saw each living thing as an expression of an aspect of the divine having the human experience. Thus, they saw our destiny in all of its peculiarity as trying to manifest that, to perfect the divine in you. And that can only be done if you have a harmonious and a balanced relationship with the ecology and the cosmology that you're a part of. And that means you have to develop wisdom schools using metaphor and folklore and dance and music and other kinds of rituals to teach the concepts, the ideas, and principles of how the universe works, how nature and its ecology work, how the human being and its ecology work, and what was the relationship between the three. And our rituals and our cultures and our cultural institutional tools, because dance is not culture, music is not culture, drama, theater is not culture. These are the tools of culture. Culture is the concepts, ideas, and principles that our ancestors discerned from observation of ecology and cosmology over millennia. And how do we take those rules and concepts we learn? We use them to create our social construct so that we relate to each other as human beings in the same manner as the rest of the universe relates to each other. In this partnership of harmony and balance, of cause and effect. And so it's these rules that we must learn. That is the body wisdom of the ancestors. You know, the Igbos call them in the Yoruba, call them their odus, their verses of wisdom, which they try to teach by using the anthropomorphic symbolisms of the principles, concepts, and ideas that we call orishas, so that we can learn to appreciate the qualities and attributes in nature and to recognize similar quality and attributes in ourselves. And as we watched how nature developed its qualities and attributes, we learn to develop our qualities and attributes in partnership with nature and in partnership with one another, so that we can create institutions. And all of our institutions and their peculiarities are a replica of these universal principles, concepts, and ideas that we call forces of nature, or we call orishas. Or in the Voodoo system, we call them loas. In the Akan system, we call them obosun. In the ancient Kemetic system, we call them the Neteru. And so when we talk yourself, in essence, you are the very ancestors you pour libation to in their leap forward. When I gave birth to my children, I gave birth to myself. So that when this temple, that this body of energy that I call me lives in, dies, I've already established multiple other temples that carry multiple aspects of my being forward. As I've came forward with multiple aspects, one of the aspects, of my parents and my other siblings, 13 of us, represents other aspects of those same parents. Yet all of us have the possibility of the totality of both parents. And when we look at the elements that make us up, the minerals, the elements, and so forth, they're the same things we find in nature. When we get hungry after depleting through work, probably millions of cells, we don't eat other human beings to replenish ourselves. We eat everything else in nature. So we are everything else in nature. Composed and transposed in its own peculiar way. So when we talk about culture, we're really talking about African sacred science. When we talk about spirituality, we're really talking about African sacred science. And this wasn't a hit and miss thing. We had an oral tradition and a written tradition going back beyond any other civilization in the world. in producing those methodologies of transferring wisdom from one generation to another, from one element of society to another. The whole idea in the African culture is that everyone in the community understood the ecology in the same way. That everyone in the community, whether he was the sheep herder, whether he was the farmer, whether he was the fisherman, whether he was the person that dug the viaducts, whether he was the house builder, the role of those we call priests, and we didn't use that, the word Africans use, and none of our language meant priest. The only thing that can come close to what they meant is scholar, or wisdom scholars, people who we would now call persons with PhD and masters. Those were the people who had mastered the wisdom of the universe, or mastered an aspect of the wisdom of the ecology. And together they tried to find ways to transfer that body of information to the everyday man and woman who did not have time to indulge in that kind of deep study, so that the community would work in harmony and balance. And that institutions that they created would reflect these laws of nature and would reflect the laws of the universe, and that those laws that govern nature and govern the universe, when we have our inward reflection, we realize those are the same laws that govern us, the human being. And so we want to learn those laws and use them to create the artificial social ecology that we live in, and use the process of socialization to continue to transfer that body of wisdom, especially intergenerationally. So when we're talking about culture, it's not a little thing. And I think it'd be better if we move away from the concept of dealing with culture without describing the difference between the tools of culture and the ideas of culture. And at the same time, knowing that at the core of your culture is what we call our spiritual system, or what should more appropriately be called the system of African sacred science, the body wisdom that has been accumulated over millions of years. And since we know we are matter and energy, we can prove all of that. We know that we have electrical circuits in our bodies that attend to the functioning and keeping the energy going. We call that spirit or soul or both. But we have not, in this perverted culture we find ourselves in, have not been able to properly manage the system that we are. In Africa, we manage that system. And it comes down to the food you eat, how you keep your body healthy through exercise and other activities. All of those things are part of your spiritual system. They're not something separate from it. Your diet is a part of your spiritual system. Your exercise motif is a part of your spiritual system. Your thinking processes is a part of your spiritual system. Your mental construct, which comes from your application of the rules of socialization to your ecology, is a part of your spiritual system. So I know I may have gone over time, but that is the time that I wanted to give to the State of Emergency Global Black Community Town Hall meeting today. And again, I'd like to thank Black Unities and healers and those who have stand up for the psychological rebalancing of African people. See, we can never be psychology, which is the generator for our spiritual essence. The political victories, we've won many. The economic victories, we've won many. And the reason our wheels are still spinning, because we have not won the cultural and spiritual victories we need to win, because those are the glue and the instructor and the informer of the economics and the politics. So thank you again. I hope I've been able to contribute something worthy, and I'll see y'all the next time.